All right, my good friends. This is Mr. Davis. This is Wednesday night. I'm making it for Thursday's homework. Thursday's homework is just going to be an ed puzzle for you to finish. So, um, one thing I want to do, I went over those tips on your DBQ of pros and cons, and I also went and I gave feedback on just about everybody. I think I have two or three DBQs that I need to give detailed feedback to, and I tried to break it down onto what I thought you would may get. One thing I might have been a little bit generous on, like thesis statements, because I think you'll get better at that. But just make sure that you're making an argument in your thesis statement. And I'm just going to edit this doc right here. One thing I want to, this is a DBQ we're going to be looking at. Two things. One thing, if you're struggling, like if you're not arguing with a document, like each document, you should have it back up your thesis statement. So one tip that could help you make sure you're arguing with the document or you're using the document to benefit you, you could do like, just say one sentence, and what I'm doing here is I'm I I'm just doing like a typical paragraph that you might write about a document, where you kind of you summarize the document a little bit, and then you hip it. You tell us like the hip again is their sources, and then to make sure you get the points for arguing with the document, you can kind of do the same thing we did before, but therefore, comma, and then that sets you up to make sure you're arguing with the document. So like if it is you know how to something about like the Mongols being very cultured, you could be looking at a document that shows like how much money they made or something like that. At the last sentence of your paragraph to start describing that document, you say, therefore, this source shows that the Mongols were far more than just barbarians. So that just might be a tip to add to the end of your paragraphs when you're talking about a document. Also, another thing to note is you can group documents. Thomas did this pretty well. You don't necessarily have to write one full paragraph about each document. You can put them into combine documents into one paragraph, especially if they're kind of saying the same things or showing you the same thing. So I think it's a little bit. It helps me just to write a paragraph for a document, hip it and source it, and so on, and just kind of helps me stay organized. But you don't necessarily have to write a full paragraph about each document. For me, it just helps me stay organized. Also, I just wanted to show you this again talk about outside evidence. So outside evidence is like you're a lawyer in a court case, and your outside evidence is something that you are bringing into the courtroom that nobody's ever heard of before, because like all everybody else knows is the documents. But if you bring in some type of outside source that that makes your argument even better, that is what you get the point for outside evidence. So think of outside evidence, its dates, its names, its quotes are great, but make sure when you use the outside evidence that you tie it into your thesis statement. So if it was the Mongols, and if you were arguing that they were far more than just barbarians, you could have a quote about the guy that some people even use this could walk a full length of Silk Road with a pot of gold on their head. But you'd want to attribute that to like who said that, what culture was talking about that. But you don't just like throw out a random date. The Mongols conquered the Abbasid Caliphate in 1279 and just leave it as that. You could say the Mongols conquered the Abbasid Caliphate in 1279, proving that they could take down a very advanced, cultured state who no one thought that they could take down the um, the Abbasid Caliphate. But soon the Tigris River is going to be running black with ink from the House of Wisdom. That would be great outside evidence. But don't just say a date or a name. Put some facts, and why does that outside evidence um, help you? And everybody should get 2 points for outside evidence, because it's an open note exam. You have tons of evidence in front of you. You should be able to tie anything into your argument. Okay, so that is my little kind of DBQ soapbox I want to talk about. You did a really good job. I was pretty impressed. You did a really good job. Keep up the good work. We're not going to, or I should say, we are going to do some more of these. Not because I hate you, but because basically it's 45 minutes. I'm not asking you to do a whole weekend's worth of work when I ask you to write a DBQ. I'm asking you to do basically a little bit more than a class period. So I think that's acceptable. So we'll be doing more of these. And the next one will be about Unit 4, because you've got to get used to the time period. You got to get used to, uh, reading documents quickly, etc. And if we're not together, I got to be able to see what's going on in your head and in your writing, and hopefully you can kind of get some feedback from me that's helpful. All right, so what we're going to do, this is Davis rulers legitimize their rule. This is DBQ. If you can't find this was a link to the other day, so it should still be up in your drive as recent docs you've looked at. But AP exam review, this is the one that says Davis rulers. It is like so Davis rulers legitimize rule. All right, so this is the second type of a DBQ from Unit 3. So we're pretty much wrapping up Unit 3 here. I'm just going to talk about sourcing, and then we're going to move on to Unit 4. So Unit 3 was the Ottomans, the Safavids, the Mughals, the Qing, and the Ming. They also talk about Russia. You'll see sources in here, and especially this one, you'll see England and France as well. And they're not major players in land-based empires as they are in the maritime empires, but they still are discussed because technically they are their own kind of empire within their own borders. All right, so the prompt on this DBQ is evaluate the extent to which the methods used by rulers to legitimize their authority were similar. So first off, evaluate the extent. So that is kind of asking you to discuss which methods that rulers use. Basically, you're discussing which methods that rulers use to legitimize their authority. They're also asking you basically to compare which groups are using similar methods, and then you could take it another direction too and say these two groups are using religion and this one is not. So we'll look at that in sources. So also a big thing here, and I think maybe we missed it in some of us, it's asking methods with an S. It says plural. So they want you to talk about more than one method. If we're talking about Unit 3, three things that should be kind of evident now is they used gunpowder, was militaristic. Okay, used gunpowder. They taxed the heck out of their people. Okay, so these are three huge takeaways here. They use gunpowder. That's how these empires became empires. And like I said, most empires don't just become empires like nice and peacefully and democratically, and they go to the bargaining table and say, "I'll give you this. This is a fair trade." Ask the American Indians how the United States empire um, came about, and they'll tell you that it was not very peacefully. It wasn't democratically. All right, so they used gunpowder. They're very militaristic. The Ottomans were uh, beasts in terms of military and organization. They kind of came right after the Mongols, so other people learned a lot from the history of the Mongols on how they governed and how they were efficient. But they're a little bit different people, of course. They also taxed the heck out of their people. Every society is going to be talking about taxes. In some cases, it's taxes on a different religious group. In some cases, it's a tax on conquered people to stay in their you know, to keep violence down. But they're going to tax the heck out of their people. With that tax money, this kind of goes hand in hand. They're going to be major building projects. The Taj Mahal in the Mughal Empire, the Palace of Versailles in France, the Winter Palace in Russia is a great example of this. Um, the list goes on and on and on. And these the majority of these rulers, except for one source in this document, is going to kind of not be religious, but majority of these the rulers are going to tell the people that, hey, you better listen to me because I am the closest thing to you have to God on earth. So if you upset me, you upset God, and in some cases you're going to hell. So we are going to look at that. But that's three huge takeaways from Unit 3. They were very militaristic. That's how they became empires. They taxed their heck out of their people. So they got tons and tons of money to pay for the military and to pay for these all go hand in hand. It's like the one big circle here. Most of the rulers legitimized themselves as rulers by kind of deifying themselves. All right, so I'm going to give you. I'll pause this. I'm going to give you. I not give you. You should take about um, 8 to 10 minutes to read all these sources. You might have already done this, but just do it again and never keep reading sources is never a bad plan. So take about 10 minutes and read all these documents. There's 5 of them. Okay. Okay, so let's look at these first two sources. Here, so I'm just gonna ask you. So, is there anything similar? Just write and type in. Is there anything that you can find any connection between these two sources? So, whatever you think connects these two sources, just type it in. Yeah, and it took me a second to do that. One of the things, there's several things that connect the Ottomans and the Safavids. One, their location, they're right next to each other. Two, we know that they used gunpowder to create their empire. So that is one thing. What connected these two sources to me, it took me a second, but this is a Venetian merchant. So, um, who who is this person? It reports from Venetian merchants from the Safavid Empire during the early reign of Shah Ismail. So, what are the Safavids? Shah is the title used by the Safavid uh, caliphs. So, after Ismail's first victory, the members of his sect flocked to join him just because in their books they found it foretold that a prophet of their religion would come and they must support and exalt him. Everyone, in particular his soldiers, consider Ismail immortal and that he is seen as a holy of holies, full of divinatory power, and for he takes counsel from no one. His every act is divine inspired. So he is an absolute ruler. Ishmael is an absolute ruler. One thing that we'll be able to connect this to later on, the Sun King Louis XIV in one of the pictures. Now, this next up is Venetian, that is someone from Venice. So Venice is in Italy. It's like the trading post. It's where all the goods from the Silk Road go and before they get up into Europe, basically. So then this next one, this was a drawing titled Panorama of Constantinople by a Danish artist. So a Danish artist means that they're from the Netherlands, up in Northern Europe. So the Danish artist Melchior Lorck, during his travel around the Ottoman Empire. So possibly what this is going to tell me is that you could make an argument that they both uh, empires wanted to solicit trade into their empire, so then to bring in money. Economics were a big part of these empires, and I would just say that because all of these ships that you see out here in the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Empire was a crossroads between Asia and Europeans. So a lot of goods that came from Asia that went into Europe crossed through Constantinople, and so the trade was very important to that. So, and a Danish artist who is drawing this, he's traveling around the Ottoman Empire, and he's probably he's trading. He is learning about the Ottoman Empire to tell the Europeans about the Ottoman Empire. So there is a connection. It could be a trading connection. Both groups want to make money. The way that you make money as a country is that your exports outweigh your imports. And that what I mean by that is that people are buying more goods from you that you're buying from them. Kind of like how China always had the most goods until the age of imperialism. So that's the connection. All right, so let's go down to document 3. So take a second and read this. Okay, after you read this, hopefully you figure out something that this is James I of Scotland and the fourth of England. So he is king of both England and Scotland. He's talking to their parliament, and here he has deified himself. This is an important date here, 1610. Now I don't expect you to know it right off the bat, but in the early 1500s is when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Thesis to the church door in Wittenberg. And also, another thing happens, Henry VIII gets his divorce not from the Pope, but from Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, because Henry VIII broke away from the Catholic Church. He had a major schism with the Catholic Church, and he started the Church of England. And at the top, like basically the Pope of the Church of England was the King of England. So at this point, literally, James I is literally the highest figure in the Church of England, and he is comparing himself to a god, very similar to how Ismail was saying, like, he was the god on earth, and nobody questions his stuff. In this thing, they do the same thing. And James the First, and if you can imagine, the people in Parliament were rolling their eyes probably when hearing James the First talking about how great he is, and he's one of the prophets from the Bible. It says, but just kings will ever be willing to declare what they will do, if they will not incur the curse of God. I will not be content that my power be disputed upon, but I shall ever be willing to make the reason appear of all my doings and the rule of my actions according to my laws. So basically, he's saying that he has the power from God. Nobody should question his power, but since he is talking to Parliament, he kind of says that I'll try to do my best to follow the laws. So you see some very much similarities, even though they're very different in terms of location. Two different religions, the Safavids and the Ottomans are Muslims. The English, although they're not Catholic anymore, they're still Christian. So that's our third source. And then next year, here's another Christian nation. This is a Catholic nation. I don't think you would get 2 pictures, 2 images, and 2 out of 5. I think you're going to get 4 text-based and 1 writing-based source. In fact, that's what they said. But if you got a picture like this is Louis XIV. This is at the Palace of Versailles. So all 3 things come into play here. Louis the 14th, he was militaristic. He basically the country was bankrupt because of all of his wars. That on his deathbed, he regrets how many wars he took France into that just cost him money and were very, very kind of costly and non-productive, I would say. So that's one thing. The next thing is that he taxed his people to pay for those things. So that's another thing. And also, he was the Sun King. He was a light to his people, so very much a godlike figure to France. Now, France was Catholic; they did not have a break from the Catholic Church, but Louis the 14th had. There was a point where there was a Protestant movement in France. There was French Protestants are called Huguenots. That would be a good piece of outside evidence if you could talk about how the French Protestants showed that the Protestant Reformation had gone into France, but the kings were going to remain Catholic. There was a Catholic or a Protestant king, Henry of Navarre, in France, but he decided that it best suit him if he converted to Catholicism. So Louis the 14th is Catholic. So now we have a Catholic. We have two different types of Muslims, and we have a Protestant, and the first four sources, all using their religion to get power, to show how powerful they were, and bowing down before Louis the 14th. Louis the 14th is above him. That's symbolism. He's walking up to Louis the 14th. He's bowing down. Everybody's coming out to see this ceremony, almost as it is if it is a sacrament to come out and to live at the Palace of Versailles. And just a backstory, why the Palace of Versailles was built and why he invited all these rich people out to the Palace of Versailles. And this is the old adage, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. He invited basically his political enemies out to Versailles. I'm talking about Louis the 14th here. And he did so that he could keep an eye on them, and idle hands are the devil's workshop. And what I mean by that is instead of the nobility trying to conspire against Louis the 14th, take power away from him, try to manipulate the politics in their country, instead of doing that, the nobles are invited to live with Louis the 14th, and he just gets them to party nonstop. So they just party all the time. They go hunting. They have ballroom dancing, and they fight over who is gonna hold a candle as Louis the 14th's hair gets combed at night. So they do all these extravagant things. They go broke, and they don't focus on politics. They just focus on partying. So this is not while it's not technically a religious ceremony, you can see Louis the 14th on top here acting like a god as the peasants bow down in front of him. And you also see the military might here. These are soldiers of Louis the 14th, his personal, basically bodyguards, if you will, carrying their flags. All right, and last but not least, this is where it gets a little bit different. This is where each document is going to have at least one conflicting document, or that can't be grouped with one another. And in this one, this Chinese document cannot really be grouped with the other ones, or they kind of dispute the other ones. And why is that the case, you ask yourself? Well, one thing is the Ming and the King believed in the civil service exam as a very Confucius theory and principles. And Confucianism was based on everybody following their role in society. Confucianism wanted a stable society. It didn't want people to protest. It didn't want, you can make an argument that didn't necessarily want different classes. You have your servant and you have your master, you have your ruler and you have your subject, you have your father and your son, etc. It was very stable because everybody followed their role, and they didn't get out of line, so to speak. So go ahead and read this one from This is from Zhangji. He is Emperor Zhangji from 1661 to 1722, the second Qing emperor. So the Qing are the people that conquered the Ming. So take a second and read that. Okay, here. So this one is not religious. They kind of this ruler is saying that he is not a god. He can't just take what he wants. He's not an absolute monarch. It says the doctrine of means says a superior man does what is proper to the station in which he is. He does not go beyond this. In a high situation, he does not treat with contempt his inferiors. So they're saying the leader should not look down on somebody just because they're the king and the other person is not. This contradicts how Louis XIV would have lived his life. In a low situation, he does not court the favor of his superiors. He rectifies himself and seeks nothing from others, so that he has no dissatisfaction. He does not murmur against heaven nor grumble against man. Thus says that the superior man is quiet and calm, waiting for the appointments of heaven, while the mean man walks in dangerous paths looking for lucky occurrences. So this is very different than how Louis XIV governed, or maybe how Shah Ismail governed, where nobody could question them. This very clearly states that the Qing might have the mandate of heaven, but they're not necessarily a god like Ishmael and Louis XIV kind of see themselves as. So that's a way that you could talk about how the Chinese leaders were different than absolute monarchs in this case. But so that's just a way of looking at the sources. What I need you to do tonight, so the only thing to do that I would be seeing if you did or not is to finish the ed puzzle. But in the AP exam folder, there is a first Unit 4 outline. I would like you to read that. It kind of concludes with two primary sources of the time period down here at the bottom. And then also, there is a Unit 4 review, just like we had. This was made by the same person that made the Unit 3 review. This is another good Cliff Notes, packed with information. And I saw some of you guys, if you guys were able to, in 45 minutes, really truly write the essay that you did, and you didn't take like the whole weekend, if you wrote that essay in 45 minutes and you looked back and you found facts that helped you, man, that was beast mode. So this is another great resource. This is Unit 4. So we're moving now into Unit 4. Unit 4 is a little bit easier for me to teach, I feel like, than Unit 3. So what I'd like for you to do, because another DBQ is coming up here. I'm not going to give it away to you tonight, but two things I'd like for you to do to prepare for Unit 4 is first, read the first Unit 4 outline. Second, read this Cliff Notes of Unit 4. It might be a little bit confusing, but it's actually not this one. It is this one. So read this. It's about all in all, with if you take away like pictures and stuff, it's probably about 28 slides or so. So read those two things to get you prepared for discussing Unit 4 and being prepared to write an essay about Unit 4. So that is it for me tonight. I'll try to get this out to you at some point. Take care.